President Zelensky welcomes America's top diplomat, Antony Blinken, and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on a high-stakes visit to Kyiv yesterday, and a choreographed chance to stand side by side with Ukraine, finally, on what was day 60 of Russia's war.
Дійсно допомагають Україні. Хочу подякувати і від себе особисто подякувати президенту Байдену.
Zelensky thanked the US and Joe Biden personally for his help, now more than $3 billion in military aid to Ukraine. He had hoped President Biden would come in person himself, but the trip was deemed too risky by the White House, as it would have been for these two top officials just weeks ago. But America's stance has hardened, and it's no longer as concerned its words and actions will trigger a US conflict with Russia.
A sovereign, independent Ukraine will be around a lot longer than Vladimir Putin's on the scene.
Hence Mr. Blinken's assertions later during a press conference in Poland.
Russia has already failed, and Ukraine has already succeeded, because the principal aim that President Putin brought to this, in his own words, was to fully subsume Ukraine back into Russia, to take away its sovereignty and independence. And that has not happened, and clearly will not happen.
The Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin went further with this apparent new American aim for a post-war Eastern Europe.
We want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine. So it has already lost a lot of military capability and a lot of its troops, quite frankly.
Austin also spoke of us, as in America, winning the fight, as the two pledged a further $700 million in aid, including weapons like Javelin anti-tank systems, seen here in a tweet by the US Defense Department, being loaded onto planes bound for Ukraine. The two also announced a return of American diplomats and a new ambassador. The relative calm of Kyiv, a long way from the besieged city of Mariupol in the south, where this satellite image shows the devastation around the sprawling Azovstal steel plant, where as many as 3,000 Ukrainian civilians and soldiers are sheltering underground. Russia said it would open a humanitarian corridor to allow civilians to leave, but there's been no evidence of that so far today. But footage was released by Ukraine's Azov battalion yesterday, showing the desperate conditions inside. This woman says they haven't been outside for 2 months. The children haven't seen daylight, she says, and they only have enough water and food left for a week at most.
Everyone who wants to get evacuated, for example, from Mariupol, has the opportunity to do so because we open humanitarian corridors.
That's according to one of Russia's top diplomats at the United Nations, who said it was the Ukrainians who weren't allowing its civilians to leave the steel plant, not the other way round. And so the military muscle flexing continues, including this latest demonstration of Russia's new intercontinental ballistic missile, designed to carry nuclear warheads and dodge deterrent missile shields. In that context, the chances of a ceasefire being brokered tomorrow, when the UN Secretary-General sits down with President Putin in person in Moscow, seem very slim indeed.
Meanwhile, today, the Defense Secretary, Ben Wallace, has been echoing Mr. Blinken's assessment of Russia's war aims during a briefing to MPs. He said that Moscow had so far failed in nearly every one of its objectives and described Ukraine as an inspiration to us all, and said the UK would be sending armoured vehicles fitted with launchers for anti-air missiles to beef up Ukraine's defences.
As we can see from Ukrainians' requests, more still needs to be done. So for that reason, I can now announce to the House that we shall be gifting a small number of armoured vehicles fitted with launchers for those anti-air missiles. These Stormer vehicles will give Ukraine forces enhanced short-range anti-air capabilities both day and night.
Well, there's also been an explosion in Russia today at an oil facility in the Bryansk region. Let's speak now to our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, who's in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. Lindsay.
Matt, Several Russian military and industrial installations have gone up in flames in the last few days, which is raising some questions and some eyebrows. As you said, in Bryansk, in the early hours of this morning, an oil depot went up in flames, and then another oil depot, which is very much for the military, went up in flames as well. Now, this is 95 miles from the Ukrainian border, and it's the logistics hub for Russia's invasion in Ukraine. And this comes after Friday, when at Tver, which is northwest of Moscow, a defence research facility went up in flames. The Russians said it was because of ageing wiring. There was also a chemical plant that seemed to spontaneously combust. Well, I think, you know, one fire might be misfortune, two could be carelessness, but three, then you begin to think it's sabotage. By whom? We just don't know. Ukrainian special forces? It could be. Somebody else's special forces? We have no idea. But what we do know is that this will be worrying the Kremlin a lot, and they will be very concerned that the war is coming to them. It's not just about them bringing the war here to Ukraine.
And Lizzie, we're also hearing reports of an attack in Transnistria, the pro-Russian breakaway region of Moldova. Tell us more about that.
That's right. So Transnistria, it's part of Moldova, even though it's controlled by Moscow, and it abuts Ukraine. And last week, a Russian general said that what they wanted to do was open a corridor so that the bits of Ukraine that they control in the south and east were connected up to Transnistria. And today, at a security building, somebody, we don't know who, fired a rocket-propelled grenade. Now, what does this mean? It's not clear. But what we do know is that Belarus is involved in this. The Russians have, used that as a staging point. You've got refugees going into Poland. Now you've got this in Transnistria. This war is not just affecting Ukraine with all the destruction and human costs. It's destabilizing the entire region.
Lindsay, thanks very much indeed. Well, a short time ago, I spoke to Michel Duclos about Emmanuel Macron's role on the world stage. He's a former French ambassador to Syria and now acts as a special advisor to the independent think tank Institut Montaigne. I put it to him that President Macron had always prided himself on being able to talk to strong men like Trump or Putin, but it hasn't always worked. Did he think that Mr. Macron's re-election would change that?
President Macron has given mixed signals about that, but I think personally that it will be very difficult for him to continue talking to Putin. And the priority now is elsewhere. The priority is to maintain a strong unity among Western powers and especially among EU member states.
And now that he's been re-elected, is Macron now the unofficial re-crowned king of Europe?
Being the most experienced head of state or government in the whole continent, and also because the other natural leader, the German Chancellor, just arrived, is in the process of putting together a coalition. So yes, in a way, Macron is certainly someone who has an important job to play in Europe.
And what do you think he will do with his authority and his power, especially in Europe? What's his vision?
As I already mentioned, the first thing to do is to keep the EU member states united. That's not completely easy when you see the Germans having difficulty to go to an embargo on oil and gas. You see the Poles claiming that we are not doing enough and demanding a more robust stance against Russia. And on the other hand, Mr. Orbán from Hungary keeping an alliance with Putin. So the first thing to do for President Macron is to keep the European united, it seems to me.
And finally, what about Boris Johnson? Boris Johnson and Emmanuel Macron famously do not get on very well. They wind each other up. The entente is certainly not cordial. What happens now?
I think that the French were a bit irritated that the British Prime Minister took the light when he visited Kyiv, but that's very superficial. I think that in reality, there are an opportunity with the Ukrainian war from some kind of rapprochement. We are not yet to the entente, but we could be in a phase of a cordial rapprochement, it seems to me, because we've got the same interest and there is a need for the both countries to cooperate, not only on Ukraine, but also on many other issues in Africa, in Indo-Pacific, in multilateral forums, for instance.
Okay, on an optimistic note then, Michel Duclos, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for inviting me.